Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, BMX fans, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to another episode of Inside BMX here on BMX Live TV. Really delighted today to bring to you a slightly different guest, I think is probably the best way to describe it. Somebody that you wouldn't normally see on the BMX Live TV broadcast, but certainly got a very, very interesting view on things. Today we're going to be speaking to Adam Carey from BMX in Thailand. He's the Thai national BMX coach. Delighted to have him on board. Adam, hi, how are you?
Not too bad, thanks, Rich, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, feeling pretty good. Thank you very much. Really, really nice to have you on Inside BMX. Just wanted to have a chat really about, BMX in Thailand, your experiences coaching the team, that kind of thing. So let's get straight into it. Really looking forward to speaking to you and just finding out a little bit more. So, with you being the coach of the national BMX team of Thailand, obviously that's not the kind of job that you pick up every day. So just let us know, how did you actually get into that role? How did it all come around?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting kind of story. I guess not many people get asked to take on this kind of job, but I ended up with an email actually in my inbox, and I was like, really? What's going on here? But the long and short of it was that at Chimaya, the team manager, he lived in Australia for, 2-3 years. And his coach was my coach growing up, Trevor Stanford, the Blackpool Bullet.
Everybody knows.
And so he lived with Trev for a couple of years. And so I got to know Ad a little bit. And China, the first Kaizen Trophy race, I helped out one of his athletes. He was just talking about one of his athletes and the problems that he was facing. And I just kind of, took 15, 20 minutes to help him out. And apparently it helped a bit. And so then, when it came time for them to look for a coach, obviously I had an email sitting there, and after discussing with my wife, thought, I might as well, something I've always wanted to do, so take the opportunity and run with it.
Yeah. So how have you found actually coaching the guys over there in Thailand? Has it been as straightforward an experience as some people may think it be, or may not think it might be? How is it to actually coach athletes from a completely different culture?
Yeah, 100%. Look, the culture and the living style is a huge shift from what I'm used to from here in Australia. I went there and saw the athletes, and I was blown away by their athletic talent. The power and speed is just phenomenal. But obviously there's some massive holes in the training elements that they've got. The first 6 months for me, it was just kind of assessment mode, seeing what we needed to do, how we needed to put programs together, and how we needed to kind of better prepare those guys for long-term development, towards 2024, 2028, with a very real plan to kind of get Thailand into the top world kind of spectrum.
Okay, where do you think they would sit in terms of, versus Australia, Great Britain, that kind of, BMX nation that's already very well established? Obviously, Thailand would be described as a developing nation within BMX. Is the gap,
100%.
Fairly large? Is it closing quickly? How do you find that ongoing?
Look, I honestly think that when we talk about the gap between, I had the guys come over to Australia for a full month for a training camp last year, and they did really well. They raced against a lot of Australians. The gap was not actually the gap was pretty close. But when you talk about some of the European countries, the gap is quite substantial, and so bridging that gap is a bit more habitual than just raw performance. I mean, if you look at watts per kilo and sprint times and all those sorts of things, there's other elements to racing BMX and racing BMX Supercross that kind of those factory dads and sports scientists just don't get. And so that's kind of been the element that we're trying to break down in Thailand and just go through with those fundamentals.
Okay. And how the Thai BMX scene out there? Because obviously it's not a place that we visited with the World Cup Tour. I'm really, really interested to know how the BMX scene in Thailand is, how many tracks, how many riders, you know, what's the background to your program?
Look, okay, so there's probably about 600 to 700 riders that follow the national series over there. They have like a national championship series race, and that's live broadcast on Thailand national sporting TVs.
Wow.
So like it is a huge deal over there. I think 3 million people tune in when it's live on TV, and then you get your 10 or 15,000 viewers if it's live on their Facebook page. So the following is substantial if you could compare it to something like Australia. The tracks leave something to be desired. I'm very spoilt from Australia. I grew up near Shepparton, an area like Thailand where the tracks are, some are full bitumen. Like the whole thing is bitumen. The pro sections are bitumen. Like concrete. Some have got loose dirt on them, but like an inch of loose dirt or whatever. But the riders just get in there and go as hard as they possibly can anyway. So while it might not be World Cup level, there is areas there that can be, we can use certain parts of tracks and certain elements of what we need to do to prepare, which is what we have been doing over the last year.
Okay. So when you take your guys and girls to a World Cup event, are they, this is probably going to sound like the wrong turn of phrase, but are they in awe? Do they feel like they fit in there? Do they feel like they're ready to compete? Because they always seem very enthusiastic from what I've seen.
Yeah, look, 100%. That is a very valid question. And I think, a lot of other coaches were sitting there going, what the hell is Adam doing bringing all these guys to the World Cup? There's a lot of coaches that have this viewpoint that if you're not at the level, you're not there to compete, like at the top level, you shouldn't be there. The World Cups are no joke. There's 200 people there that know how to ride a BMX bike. It is a complete, need to constantly be better. You see some of the athletes that, especially the younger riders when they meet their idols. For me, it was like Kyle Bennett or Randy Stumpfhauser. I got to ride against those guys, which was really cool. But the first time I ever rode against Kyle Bennett, I completely idolized him and just like, he'd already beaten me just purely from that mental space. And so, for these young Thai riders that are coming up, they see these guys, the Nick Kinmans, the Sylvain Andres, all these guys that are just, and idolize them massively, and therefore in their heads can't compete with it. And that's just a cultural thing that we're working on changing. So we're just working on changing some of those habits that have kind of formed there.
Yeah, I think that goes the same for any rider in any country. If they're in awe of the people that they're racing against, then it's going to make it that little bit harder. And then to throw into the mix as well, I was very surprised the first time that we actually spoke at Papendal a couple of years ago when suddenly realised that you were getting up on the gate as well and actually getting involved. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So look, I mean, obviously I've been racing since I was 9 years old. I'm 32 at the end of this year. So realistically, I put myself through university. I wasn't one of the top riders in Australia. When I turned 18, it was not looking great. So I went and did my exercise sports science degree. And so once I finished my degree, my honours, my masters, I kind of went, I'll get back into racing properly again. And so by the time I started riding properly again, I was 24. And so the first season that I wanted to do a full World Cup season in was 26. And I had a really bad injury. I was actually out probably racing like properly for about 14 months. So 2018 was kind of my first few trips overseas. And then last year, I just wanted to try and also ride with the guys, get the experience about what, jet lag, because, the education isn't necessarily the experience. And so it's about kind of, fitting the gaps in with, knowing when to travel and knowing how, our annual plan will change depending upon, how much we are traveling. So, typically, culturally, the Thailand national team for all sporting codes in Thailand try to send their athletes to as many events as possible. So, and that's kind of detrimental for training practices. So for the last 12 months, I've been working on cutting the schedule back. Not so much like this year, but it was just, cutting the events back a little bit and making sure that we could get some developmental work in for those, 2024 and 2028 Olympics. Because realistically, just doing every event and not actually focusing on any weak points brings about no results. So for me, it was about learning all those little weak points, all those little traveling mistakes, all those little competition things, it was just try and I suppose get more experience for myself as well, to give those guys give better feedback, I guess.
Okay. With the situation that we're currently in worldwide at the moment, obviously racing's taken a serious step to the side this year. So in effect, your guys are going to be losing a year's worth of experience. Do you think that will give them not a problem, but do you think that's going to be really detrimental to the development?
Yes and no. To a certain degree, I was pulling the riders back from a lot of the World Cups this year, regardless. We had planned to do the Australian World Cups, which obviously didn't end up being as good as we'd hoped for. So then, with that, I'd actually pulled Manchester, pulled Papendal, and we're going to focus on the Asian Championships. The Asian Championships have been postponed. Obviously, COVID-19, everything's postponed, or everything's delayed, or everything's cancelled. But there is still that kind of underlying factor that you need to change, especially with athletes when coaching style comes in, that's a little bit different. So I'm still working on changing their behaviour that, hey, when coach isn't around, I don't get to sit around and do nothing. I actually have to, send them messages about my training, send the weights that I'm doing, all those key fundamentals that the athlete is actually driving the workhorse, the driving workhorse themselves. And that, the coach can actually just kind of manage a little bit of that direction.
Yeah, because you've just managed to kind of get yourself out of Thailand in the nick of time, really, with the COVID-19 thing. So you're coaching remotely now. You're not in a position to actually see your guys on a daily basis. So how's that working out for you at the minute? How are you?
So I use this app that all the Asian guys like. It's called Line. And so they report to me like daily, every videos of all their training, weights of all that they're lifting. The gyms were closed over in Thailand. We just started our junior development camp. And so we had athletes 14 to 16 and then the senior team as well. And they just said, look, everything's got to close. Gyms are closing for a month and a half. At restaurants, everything is closing, get out, and then all foreign coaches, you're being sent home. And so literally within a space of a week, I was back here in Australia, sitting in my house for 14 days by myself. So had plenty of time to work out how the online side of things is going to work, because I still have a few guys in Australia that I help out that I do online. So I basically just kind of replicated that by the 26 or 27 athletes that I'm helping in Thailand at the moment. Yeah.
Wow. So that's definitely a big workload then if you've got 26 or 27 in Thailand plus your Aussie athletes as well.
It is and it isn't. Once you kind of get the fundamentals down, a lot of the times they are just talking to you to vent the whole process, which is when you get an athlete that can kind of fix their own problems through that process, that becomes kind of something really cool to watch.
Fantastic. Well, there was another subject I wanted to cover as well, just with regards to your own racing, because you're a rider who is working with a lifelong health condition. So can you just tell us a little bit more about what's going on with that and how it affects you as a rider?
Yeah, no worries. So I am a type 1 diabetic. I have been since I was like 6 years old. So obviously with a strength and power sport such as BMX, it provides a little bit of a challenge in terms of the adrenal response. A lot of people think, oh, but if you have high blood sugar, you're going to have lots of energy, and that's not necessarily the case. Often, if you don't have good control over your blood sugar, you're lethargic, you don't sleep very well. So it chronically, it can, if you're not kind of monitoring it closely, it can affect what you're doing over a long term. Need to take that process to get used to the extra workload, I guess. And it goes all right. I think there's a couple of diabetic BMX racers out there. So I mentioned Aston Whitbridge-Coles from Sydney. So he's a young rider out of Sydney, and he's a type 1 diabetic. Looks really good on the bike, and I think he's going to do pretty well, in Australia, and if he decides to go overseas and race as well. But yeah, it's a tough condition to try and race BMX with, and just in terms of managing everything. And
for any riders out there who do have type 1 diabetes, Adam, have you got any advice for them in terms of, race day and that kind of thing, and just looking after themselves? Any sort of tidbits that you can bring in from a long time of racing and that kind of thing, just to make it easier?
I think the biggest thing is that we try and closely monitor our blood sugars, to a point where it's the nth degree, right? So, and that's how everyone wants it. But when we exercise, there are certain fluctuations that we get in our racing and training, and to a certain point, we need to be able to control those. And so a lot of people will steer clear of carbohydrates or all the normal foods that people get to eat when they're racing and they're trying to perform maximally. A diabetic will sometimes not be able to go to those foods, just purely because of their blood sugar levels. So it's about finding that balance, and making sure that you kind of record what's going on each race day. I mean, that's kind of the biggest thing. You learn by failures. Just add it to the bucket list that you need to improve on.
Got fairly, defined views on coaching and that kind of thing, especially with the younger kids as well. Can you just give us a little bit of a background on what your views are there, especially with bringing younger riders through to the next level? Yeah, look,
certainly I think BMX at the moment suffers from early specialization chronically, and by early specialization I mean that they're talking about performance from ages of 8, 9 and 10. If we're talking about 40% dropout, that's a viable number, but unfortunately BMX is looking down the barrel of a higher number than that, because when we consider what level riders should be racing at depending upon age, that needs to be a consideration from the sporting body. And then coaches need to be appropriately teaching to a structure that kind of meets that. The skills come first, the fun elements, and develop passion. I suppose if you're coming from it kind of key fundamentally, that passion comes first, and then the learning to train comes second.
I think that's a good place to wrap it up, actually, Adam. Is there anybody out there that you want to thank just before we call time on this one? Because somebody like yourself who's behind the scenes, never gets the chance to kind of just give thanks to the people who made them where they are. So go ahead and do that if you want to.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. Well, thanks to you for giving me the opportunity to come on here and have a chat. I think the biggest thing is that you got, I've had very supportive parents, very supportive wife, and a passion that's been able to become my livelihood. So the notion that BMX is anything other than a kid sport, I mean, I'm a big kid at heart, so I absolutely love the sport, and I want to thank everyone who participates in it for sure. And this opportunity to come here and have a chat and just kick the can, it's great.
Great stuff. Well, Adam, thanks for your time. We really, really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you with your athletes at the next World Cup. Should be good.
Whenever that is.
Yeah, thanks very much.